"We're losing him." The voice was sharp, a shard of glass in the muffled panic of the room. A second voice, lower, graver, echoed the sentiment. "No pulse. Starting compressions again." Someone get the paddles charged to 300-inch on the massive LED screen behind the stage. A live feed intended to capture a triumphant product launch instead broadcast a tragedy in real time. Julian Blackwood, the billionaire magnate, the titan of technological innovation, was dying in front of millions. His face, usually a mask of cool, impenetrable control, was ashen. His lips tinged with a terrifying blue. 20 of the city's finest medical professionals, a veritable honor guard of expertise hired for the high-profile event, swarmed his fallen form, their movements a frantic, failing ballet. They were the best, the most expensive, the most respected, and they were failing. In the hushed, cavernous auditorium, every eye was fixed on the horrifying spectacle, every breath held in a collective prayer. But in the back, near the service exit, one pair of eyes saw something else. She saw not the chaos, but the details. She saw the shallow, ineffective chest compressions, the slight misplacement of the defibrillator paddles, the panicked indecision that was costing a man his life. Her name was Elena Ramirez, and to the world, she was nobody. A night maid, a ghost in the machine of Blackwood Innovations, paid to erase the traces of the powerful, not to intervene in their lives. Her uniform, a simple gray smock, was her cloak of invisibility. But beneath that uniform beat the heart of a warrior, and within her mind was a treasure trove of knowledge bought with sleepless nights and tear-stained textbooks. As the lead doctor shouted, "Still no response. I'm calling it time of death." Elena made a choice. The world saw a maid. The doctors saw an obstacle. Marcus Thorne, the company's COO, saw a nuisance to be removed. But in that moment, as she broke through the security line and sprinted toward the stage, a desperate fire in her eyes, they were all about to learn who she truly was. What happened next would not only restart a man's heart, but would shatter an empire of lies, expose a villain hiding in plain sight, and prove that the truest measure of a person's worth has nothing to do with the size of their bank account. The world was about to witness a miracle, not from the hands of a celebrated surgeon, but from the hands of the woman who polished the floors. The annual Blackwood Gala was less a celebration and more a display of power, a carefully orchestrated performance of success. Julian Blackwood stood on a mezzanine overlooking the grand ballroom of his corporate headquarters, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. Below him, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns swirled, a glittering constellation of the city's elite. He felt nothing, not pride, not joy, just a profound, hollow ache that had been his constant companion since his father's death 6 months prior. The company, Blackwood Innovations, was his father's legacy, a monument to a brilliant mind. Now it was Julian's burden. He was a ghost haunting his own life, his movements precise, his words calculated, his heart encased in ice. He was the billionaire in the tower, and the height had only ever made him feel more alone. From his vantage point, he saw Marcus Thorne, his chief operating officer, schmoozing with a group of investors. Marcus was everything Julian was not: gregarious, charming, a master of the social game. He had been his father's right-hand man, and now he was Julian's. Julian trusted him implicitly, letting him handle the day-to-day operations while he focused on the one thing that still sparked a flicker of interest: the HeartGuard project, a revolutionary cardiac monitoring device that was his father's final obsession. He didn't notice the quiet efficiency of the catering and cleaning staff moving along the periphery, their movements designed to be unobtrusive, to be invisible. Among them was Elena Ramirez. For her, the gala was just another job, a few extra hours on top of her usual night shift cleaning the executive suites. The opulence around her was like a scene from a movie, completely disconnected from her reality of overdue bills and her mother's mounting medical expenses. Her world was a small, third-floor apartment that always smelled of Vicks VapoRub and the quiet hum of her mother's oxygen concentrator. She moved with a practiced grace, collecting empty glasses, her expression serene, her thoughts a million miles away, calculating medication dosages and wondering if she could afford the better brand of supplements the doctor recommended. The collision of these two worlds was inevitable, a spark waiting for a fuse. It came in the form of a clumsy waiter, a jostled elbow, and a splash of crimson wind down the front of Marcus Thorne's pristine white shirt. The young waiter stammered, horrified, apologizing profusely. But Marcus's fury, cold and sharp, did not land on him. His eyes scanned the area and settled on the nearest, easiest target. "Elena, you," he snarled, his voice low but carrying in a sudden lull in the conversation. "Look what your staff did." Incompetent Elena, who had been several feet away, froze. "Sir, Don't you sir me," Marcus hissed, stepping toward her. He was a predator who had found his prey. "This is a $5,000 shirt. Do you have any idea what that means? Of course you don't. You people are all the same. You drift through life, making messes for others to clean up." His voice rose, drawing the attention of those nearby. The music seemed to fade. Julian, on the mezzanine, looked down, his brow furrowing slightly at the disturbance. Elena stood her ground, her chin held high. "It was an accident, Mr. Thorne. The young man is very sorry." Her defense of the terrified waiter only enraged Marcus further. He took a step closer, invading her space, his face contorted with a sneer of pure contempt. "The young man works for you. You are responsible. I want you to get on your knees and blot this stain." Right now, a collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. It was a grotesque display of cruelty, a public humiliation designed to assert his dominance. The young waiter looked like he was about to be sick. Elena's dark eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady, a quiet thread of steel. "No, sir. I will not." From above, Julian watched, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was a flicker of something other than grief or apathy. He saw the injustice, the blatant abuse of power. He knew he should intervene. He was the CEO. His name was on the building. But the ice around his heart was too thick. It was a staff matter, his mind reasoned. Marcus was handling it. To step in would be to cause a bigger scene. And so he did nothing. He stood silent and watched as Marcus, incensed by her defiance, made a call on his phone. "Security. I want this woman removed from the premises." "She's fired." Elena didn't flinch. She simply met Marcus's hateful gaze, turned, and walked away with a dignity that his wealth and power could not touch. As she disappeared through a service door, Julian finally looked away, the champagne in his glass suddenly feeling like poison. He had witnessed a gross injustice, a moment of profound human cruelty, and his only action had been to stand by and let it happen. The hollow ache in his chest deepened, but this time, it was laced with a new, unfamiliar sting, the bitter taste of shame. He didn't know it yet, but that moment of inaction was the first crack in the frozen shell of his existence. The gala ended, the glittering guests departed, and the building returned to its nocturnal state of hushed emptiness. But for Julian, the silence was louder than the party had been. The image of Elena's defiant, dignified exit was seared into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed a fundamental test of character. He retreated to his penthouse, a sterile glass box atop the Blackwood Tower, but sleep eluded him. He found himself pacing, the city lights below mocking his own inner darkness. Why hadn't he said something? What had stopped him? The answer was as uncomfortable as it was simple. He had become disconnected. He saw people as assets, employees as numbers on a spreadsheet. Elena Ramirez was just a line item in the janitorial budget, and he had allowed her to be treated as such. The next day, he made a discreet inquiry. He learned that Elena had not, in fact, been fired. Marcus, it seemed, had enjoyed the public display but hadn't bothered with the paperwork. She was still on the schedule for her usual night shift. An odd sense of relief washed over Julian, followed by a new resolve. He needed to understand. He needed to see her again, not as a CEO looking down from a mezzanine, but as a man bearing witness. That night, long after the last employee had gone home, Julian didn't take the private elevator to his penthouse. Instead, he walked the quiet, dimly lit corridors of the executive floor. He found her in the main boardroom, a solitary figure meticulously polishing the massive mahogany table until it reflected the city skyline like a dark, still lake. She worked with a focused intensity, her movements economical and precise. There was a grace to her labor that he had never considered before. He watched from the shadows for a long time, an unseen observer. He saw her pause to straighten a crooked picture frame. He saw her find a wallet left behind by an executive and carefully place it on the desk for them to find in the morning, without a moment's hesitation. He saw integrity in the small, unseen moments. Over the next few nights, this became his secret ritual. He would stay late, pretending to work, but really he was watching Elena. He learned her routine. He saw the quiet kindness she showed to the security guards, sharing a thermos of coffee she brought from home. He started asking questions, not of Marcus, but of Mr. Henderson, the head of household staff who had served his family for 40 years and knew every secret the building held. "The Ramirez girl?" Henderson said, his voice gentle. "A good woman, a hard worker. All her pay goes to her mother's care. The woman is very ill. A bad heart." The word struck Julian with unexpected force. A bad heart. The very thing his company was supposedly trying to fix with its multi-billion-dollar technology. The irony was galling. Marcus, meanwhile, continued his petty war. Julian, now paying attention, noticed the small cruelties he had been blind to before. A memo was circulated announcing a reduction in hours for the night cleaning staff. Citing budgetary efficiencies, Julian knew the budget was fine. This was punishment, aimed squarely at Elena and her colleagues. He saw Marcus speak to her once in the hallway, his tone dripping with condescension, and though he couldn't hear the words, he saw the way Elena squared her shoulders and refused to be diminished. The investigation was no longer just about Elena. It was about Marcus. Julian started pulling operational reports, cross-referencing invoices, looking at the numbers Marcus presented to the board with a new, critical eye. Everything seemed to be in order on the surface, but a thread of doubt had been planted. One night, his observation yielded something extraordinary. It was late, close to 3 a.m. He saw Elena in the small, stark break room, taking her 15-minute break. She wasn't scrolling on her phone or staring blankly at the wall. She was reading. Propped open on the table was a thick, heavy book. Julian moved closer to the doorway, his curiosity piqued. He could just make out the title on the spine, Cardiovascular Pathophysiology for Advanced Practice. It was a graduate-level medical textbook. He stood frozen in the doorway, a cascade of questions flooding his mind. This woman, the night maid Marcus had tried to humiliate, the woman he had dismissed as invisible, was studying complex cardiac medicine in the dead of night. It was the first true shock to his system, the first piece of a puzzle he was only beginning to realize existed. The world he thought he knew, the simple hierarchies he had taken for granted, tilted on its axis. He had assumed she was one thing, but she was something else entirely. And for the first time in a very long time, Julian Blackwood felt a desperate, driving need to know more. The shame he felt over his inaction was now compounded by a profound, humbling intrigue. The discovery of the medical textbook changed everything. Julian could no longer remain a passive observer. The distance he had maintained between his world and hers had collapsed. He needed to talk to her, to understand the story behind the quiet maid and the complex textbook. He spent the next day wrestling with how to approach her. A summons to his office would be an abuse of power, a replication of the very dynamic he now despised. He had to meet her on her own terms, in her own space. That night, he waited until he knew she would be on her break. He walked to the small, sterile kitchen near the break room, a place he hadn't set foot in for years, and started making a pot of coffee. The aroma filled the quiet hallway just as she stepped out of the break room. She saw him and stopped short, her eyes widening in surprise and a flicker of apprehension. This was the CEO, the man who had silently watched her humiliation. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her posture was guarded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Elena," he said, his own voice sounding foreign and stilted in the quiet space. He gestured toward the coffee pot. I was just making some coffee. Would you like a cup? Her suspicion was palpable. No, thank you, sir. I should get back to work. Please, he said, and the word was imbued with a sincerity that surprised even him. I wanted to apologize. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. Apologize for what, sir? For the gala. For what Marcus said to you. For what I didn't say. He met her gaze directly, forcing himself not to look away. There's no excuse for his behavior, and there's no excuse for my silence. I was a coward, and I am truly sorry. The apology hung in the air between them. Elena's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She had expected anything but this, a raw, honest admission of failure from the most powerful man in the building. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice still quiet but no longer strained. She accepted the cup of coffee he offered. For a few moments, they stood in an awkward but not uncomfortable silence. He wanted to ask about the book, but he knew it was too soon. He had to earn that right, so instead he asked about her. He asked her how long she had worked here, what she thought of the city. Simple questions. He learned that she had been with the company for 3 years. He learned that she and her mother had moved here for a clinical trial that had ultimately failed. He spoke of his own loss, of his father, the words clumsy and unpracticed. He found himself telling this near stranger about the crushing weight of his legacy, a confession he hadn't made to anyone, not even his closest friends. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit kitchen, over 2 cups of cheap coffee, a fragile bridge was built between the penthouse and the factory floor. These clandestine meetings became their new ritual. Julian would find reasons to be in the building late, and they would talk. He learned her story in fragments, each piece a testament to her resilience. She had been top of her class in a prestigious nursing program, on a full scholarship. She was just a semester away from graduating when her mother's heart condition, a rare congenital defect, took a sudden, catastrophic turn. The doctors had given her months to live. Elena dropped out of school, forfeiting her dream, to become her mother's full-time caregiver. She took the night maid job because the hours allowed her to be with her mother during the day, to administer medications, monitor her vitals, and just be there. The books? She finally explained one night, a faint blush on her cheeks as she confessed her secret. I can't let it go. The knowledge. I have to keep learning. The more I understand about the heart, the better I can care for her. I read her EKG strips. I adjust her diet. I'm not a doctor, but I am her advocate. I have to be. Julian listened, mesmerized. Her quiet, unassuming work uniform concealed a mind as sharp as any of his top engineers and a heart more courageous than any CEO he had ever met. She wasn't just studying medicine. She was living it, in the most desperate and intimate way imaginable. One night, she spoke of her frustration with the medical system. They see a chart, a number, a condition, she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion. They don't always see the person. They don't see the way her breathing changes when a certain song comes on the radio, or the way her blood pressure drops when she's feeling lonely. I see that. That data is just as important. Her words resonated with him, echoing his own father's philosophy. His father had always said, technology without empathy is just machinery. Julian was building the most advanced heart monitor in the world, the HeartGuard, but it was Elena, with her books and her love, who truly understood the human heart. He started sharing details of the HeartGuard project with her. He showed her schematics, explained the algorithms. He expected her to be intimidated, but she wasn't. She listened intently, then asked pointed, insightful questions about sensor sensitivity and data interpretation that left him stunned. She saw potential flaws his own team had missed. She was brilliant. Their bond deepened, built on a foundation of shared intellect and a growing, unspoken admiration. The chasm between their worlds was shrinking with every late-night conversation. He began to see the world through her eyes, to notice the struggles of the people who kept his empire running. He saw their fatigue, their quiet worries, their humanity. Elena wasn't just a catalyst for his redemption. She was becoming his teacher, and he, the isolated billionaire, was finally, desperately, ready to learn. The trust between Julian and Elena had become a quiet, powerful force in the sterile nightscape of Blackwood Tower. Their conversations were no longer just about their pasts. They were about the present, about the company itself. Elena, with her unique vantage point, saw the subtle currents of the building's culture. She saw the fear and resentment Marcus Thorne inspired in the lower-level staff, the way his presence made people shrink. Julian, armed with this new perspective, intensified his scrutiny of Marcus's operations. The feeling that something was deeply wrong had grown from a nagging suspicion into a near certainty. The turning point came on a Tuesday night, an evening like any other. Elena was doing her final rounds, which included emptying the trash and shredding bins in the executive offices. It was a mundane task, one she had performed thousands of times. But tonight, in Marcus Thorne's office, something was different. The main shredding bin was full, but sitting right on top, somehow having missed the blades, was a single, crisp invoice. Her training was to shred everything without looking, to respect the privacy of the executives. But the name on the invoice caught her eye. Ethelred Logistics. She didn't recognize it. It wasn't one of their usual vendors. The amount listed beside the name was staggering. A wire transfer for $2 million. The description was vague. Consulting fees? Project Nightingale. She knew all the code names for their major projects. HeartGuard was Project Sentinel. Their AI division was Project Oracle. There was no Project Nightingale. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. This was wrong. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to shred the paper and walk away. Getting involved was dangerous. She had her mother to think about. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She thought of Marcus's cruelty, his sneering face at the gala. He would crush her without a second thought. But then she thought of Julian. She thought of his apology, his quiet grief, his genuine efforts to understand her world. She thought of his father's legacy, which he spoke of with such pained reverence. This invoice felt like a betrayal of all of that. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve hardened. She couldn't let this go. Taking out her old, cracked smartphone, she quickly and quietly took a clear photograph of the invoice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It felt like an immense transgression, a violation of her role, but a deeper instinct told her it was the right thing to do. The next day, she wrestled with how to get the information to Julian. She couldn't email it. The company's IT department would flag it. She couldn't confront him directly. Someone might see. In the end, she settled on a method as old-fashioned as it was discreet. She printed a tiny, grainy copy of the photo at a public library, tucked it into a plain envelope with a simple, typed note, Mr. Thorne's office. Last night, something is not right, and slipped it under the door of Julian's private study, a room only she and Mr. Henderson were cleared to clean. Julian found the envelope that evening. The moment he saw the invoice, he knew. It was the missing piece, the concrete evidence of the rot he had sensed. Ethelred Logistics, he ran the name through every corporate database he had access to. Nothing. It was a ghost. But Julian had resources the average person did not. He made a call to a private security firm run by a former intelligence officer, a man his father had trusted. I need you to find everything you can on a shell corporation, he said, his voice low and hard. Ethelred Logistics. And I need you to be invisible. The information came back less than 24 hours later, and it was devastating. Ethelred Logistics was a shell company registered in a country known for its lax financial regulations. Its sole director was a man who was Marcus Thorne's brother-in-law. For the past 2 years, Marcus had been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from Blackwood Innovations, coding the payments as R&D expenses for phantom projects like Nightingale. He was bleeding the company dry. But the discovery went deeper. The security firm's report included flagged communications. Marcus had been in secret talks with a rival corporation, a notorious venture capital firm known for hostile takeovers. The financial drain wasn't just about greed. It was a calculated strategy. Marcus was intentionally weakening Blackwood Innovations from the inside, driving down its stock value to make it a cheap and easy target for acquisition. In the new company formed after the takeover, Marcus Thorne was slated to be named CEO. This was not just embezzlement. It was a coup. It was a deliberate, methodical plan to steal his father's legacy right out from under him. The betrayal was absolute, a knife to the heart. The man his father had trusted, the man he had trusted, was a serpent. And the only person who had been brave enough to sound the alarm was not a member of his board or a high-powered executive, but a knight made with a medical textbook and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. The stakes had just escalated from personal injustice to corporate warfare. Julian's world had been turned upside down, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that Marcus would stop at nothing to see his plan through. The revelation of Marcus's treachery was a clarifying fire. Julian's grief-stricken apathy was burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. This was no longer just about a personal moral failing or a corporate problem. It was a battle for his family's name, for the livelihood of his thousands of employees, and for the very soul of the company his father had built. He knew he couldn't move against Marcus rashly. Thorne was clever, embedded in the corporate structure like a cancer, with allies on the board who were swayed by his charismatic facade and the falsified reports he'd been feeding them for years. A direct accusation without ironclad, undeniable proof would result in a bloody boardroom war that he might not win, especially with the company's finances secretly compromised. He needed more than the invoice. He needed the entire money trail. He needed to prove intent. And to do that, he needed a partner he could trust absolutely. He needed Elena. That night, he didn't wait for her break. He found her as she was starting her shift, in the deserted locker room on the service level. The stark, utilitarian space was a world away from the polished mahogany of the executive floor. He looked at her, standing there in her simple gray uniform, and saw not a maid, but an ally, the only one he truly had. "Elena," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to talk to you. Somewhere private." He led her to a small, forgotten records room in the sub-basement, a dusty archive of his father's old blueprints. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and history. There, under the dim light of a single bare bulb, he laid everything out. He showed her the report from the security firm, the complex web of shell corporations, the secret communications. He didn't soften the blow or simplify the details. He spoke to her as an equal, as a strategic partner. "He's not just stealing," Julian concluded, his voice tight with controlled rage. "He's trying to sell the company for scrap, to destroy my father's work. The note you left me, it started all of this." "You were right." Elena listened, her expression growing more serious with every word. She looked at the documents, her sharp mind quickly grasping the scale of the betrayal. She wasn't shocked by Marcus's villainy. She had seen the petty darkness in him firsthand, but the depth of his deception, the sheer audacity of it, was breathtaking. When he finished, she looked up from the papers, her gaze meeting his. "What do you need me to do?" There was no hesitation, no fear, just a quiet, unwavering resolve. It was in that moment that Julian Blackwood made the most important decision of his corporate career. He chose to reject the rigid hierarchy he had always known. He chose to place his complete trust, and the fate of his entire company, in the hands of the woman the world saw as invisible. "Marcus uses a second laptop, a personal one he keeps locked in his desk," Julian explained, his mind racing. "The security firm thinks he runs the Ethelred transactions from there, off the company network. I need access to that laptop, but my IT department is loyal to him. If I request access, he'll be tipped off and wipe it clean." He looked at her, the unspoken request hanging in the air. "You have access to his office every night," he said softly. "I know it's too much to ask. It's dangerous. If you're caught, I'll do it," she said simply. "Tell me what I need to find." His choice was made, and her acceptance had sealed their pact. They spent the next hour planning, their two minds working in perfect sync. Julian, the strategist, knew the technical side. He gave her a small, discrete USB drive containing a program that could copy the laptop's entire hard drive in under 5 minutes. He explained how to bypass the simple login screen Marcus used. Elena, the operative, knew the practical side. She knew the security guards' patrol schedules, the blind spots in the camera coverage, the exact window of time she would have each night. It was a high-stakes, high-risk plan, a secret alliance between the king and the pawn, working together to checkmate the treacherous knight. As they left the dusty room, a new dynamic had been forged between them. The barriers of class and position had dissolved, replaced by the fierce, binding loyalty of two people fighting a common enemy. Julian was no longer just a grieving son or a disconnected CEO. He was a leader, awakened and ready for battle. And Elena was no longer just a maid. She was a key intelligence agent, a woman of extraordinary courage, preparing to walk into the lion's den armed with nothing but a cleaning cart, a USB drive, and her own profound integrity. The fight for Blackwood Innovations had begun. The following week was a blur of tension and whispered, late-night communications. During the day, Julian and Marcus maintained a careful facade of normalcy. They sat in meetings together, discussed quarterly projections, and debated marketing strategies for the upcoming HeartGuard launch. To the outside world, they were a seamless leadership team. But beneath the surface, a silent, desperate war was being waged. Julian had to act as if nothing was wrong, a performance that strained every nerve. He watched Marcus, looking for any sign of suspicion, any crack in his confident exterior, but Thorne was a master of deception. He was charming, efficient, and utterly ruthless. Every night, Elena would attempt to access the laptop. The plan was fraught with peril. The first night, a security guard did an unscheduled double-back on his patrol, forcing her to abandon the attempt just as she was about to insert the USB drive. The second night, Marcus had unexpectedly returned to the office late, and she'd had to feign surprise, her heart pounding as he retrieved a file just feet from where the hidden laptop lay. Each failed attempt ratcheted up the pressure. The global launch of the HeartGuard device was just days away, and Julian knew Marcus was planning to make his move with the Vulture Capital firm shortly after. Time was running out. Marcus, for his part, was not oblivious. He sensed a change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift in Julian's demeanor. He couldn't put his finger on it, but his predatory instincts were on high alert. He began to watch, to listen. He noticed the new, quiet confidence in Elena, the way she no longer avoided his gaze but met it with a cool, unreadable calm. His suspicion, born of his own corrupt nature, began to coalesce around her. She was the one who had defied him. She was the one Julian had taken a strange, unexplained interest in. He decided she was the weak link. He began to lay a trap. On the third night, Elena finally found her window. The building was quiet. The guards were on their scheduled break. She entered Marcus's office, her hands steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. She expertly picked the simple lock on his desk drawer, retrieved the laptop, and booted it up. Just as Julian had said, the password was laughably simple. She inserted the USB drive. A small window popped up on the screen. Cloning drive, 1%. It was working. As the progress bar crawled upward, she stood watch at the door, her ears straining for any sound. The 5 minutes it took to copy the drive felt like an eternity. 99%. 100%. Clone complete. With trembling fingers, she ejected the drive, shut down the laptop, and returned it to the drawer, locking it carefully. She had it. She had the proof. But as she turned to leave, a triumphant smile gracing her lips for the first time in days, the office door swung open. It wasn't a security guard. It was Marcus Thorne. His eyes were cold, his lips twisted into a victorious smirk. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice silky smooth. Behind him stood two grim-faced security guards, men loyal to him. Elena's blood ran cold. She clutched the tiny USB drive, hidden in her fist. "Mr. Thorne, I was just finishing my duties." "Were you?" he said, stepping into the room. "Because it seems to me you were doing a little more than that." He nodded to the guards. "Check her." Before she could react, one of the guards grabbed her, his grip like iron. The other began to pat her down. She tried to resist, but it was hopeless. The guard's hand found her clenched fist and pried her fingers open, revealing the small USB drive. Marcus's eyes lit up with malicious glee. He took the drive from the guard. Well, well, what have we here? Corporate espionage. I had a feeling you were trouble, but this was only part of his plan. He hadn't known about the USB drive. That was a lucky bonus. His real trap was yet to be sprung. He gave another nod. The second guard went to Elena's cleaning cart, which she had left just outside the door. He reached into a side pocket and pulled out a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside was a prototype data chip for the HeartGuard device, a priceless piece of proprietary technology. And this, Marcus announced, his voice booming with fake outrage, was found in her personal belongings in the locker room not 10 minutes ago. She was trying to steal our most valuable secrets. It was a perfect frame-up. Elena stared at the chip, her mind reeling. She had never seen it before in her life. He must have had someone plant it. That's not mine, she whispered, her voice shaking. I've never seen that before. Of course you haven't, Marcus sneered. Tell it to the police, he turned to his guards. She's fired. Escort her out of the building, and make sure the entire night staff sees it. I want everyone to know what happens to thieves at Blackwood Innovations. The all-is-lost moment was absolute. Elena was dragged away, her protests lost in the cavernous, empty hallway. She was publicly shamed, her reputation destroyed, the evidence of Marcus's crimes now in his possession. Julian, monitoring the situation from his penthouse security feed, watched in horror, his heart sinking like a stone. He was powerless to intervene without revealing his own hand. Marcus had won. He had neutralized their only witness, seized the evidence, and created the perfect pretext to tighten his control over the company. He immediately used the incident to call for an emergency board meeting, scheduled for the day after the HeartGuard launch, to address the glaring security lapses and question Julian's fitness to lead. The trap had been sprung, and it had caught them both. All hope seemed to have vanished into the cold, unforgiving night. The day of the HeartGuard global launch arrived under a cloud of despair. The world was watching, expecting a revolutionary breakthrough in medical technology. The media was gathered, investors were ready, and the stage was set for Julian Blackwood's biggest triumph. But inside the auditorium, the air was thick with a tension only a few understood. For Julian, it was a day of reckoning. His enemy was standing right beside him, feigning support, while his only ally had been cast out, disgraced and silenced. Marcus Thorne was smug, exuding the confidence of a man who held all the cards. The emergency board meeting was looming, and the narrative was already set. Julian's lax leadership had allowed a thief to compromise their most vital project. It was the perfect power play. But Julian had one last, desperate card to play. He had spent the entire previous day in a frantic secret effort. He had managed to get a message to Elena through Mr. Henderson. A simple, cryptic plea. Be at the launch. Trust me, he didn't know if she would come. Why should she? He had failed to protect her. But he had to believe in the bond they had forged in the quiet hours of the night. As the event began, the lights dimmed and a sleek promotional video played on the massive screen. Julian stood in the wings, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. He scanned the back of the auditorium, and then he saw her. She was standing near the rear exit, not in her uniform, but in a simple, modest dress. She looked tired and worn, but she was there. Her presence was a silent affirmation of her strength, her trust, and her courage. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. He was not alone. The plan, as desperate as it was on. He walked onto the stage to a round of applause. He began his speech, his voice steady and clear, hitting all the expected notes about innovation and his father's vision. He spoke of the HeartGuard's potential to save lives. Then his tone shifted. But technology, no matter how advanced, is only as good as the integrity of the people behind it, he said, turning his gaze slowly to lock onto Marcus, who was seated in the front row. A company is not just its products or its stock price. It is a community built on trust. And sometimes, that trust is betrayed. A nervous murmur went through the audience. This was not in the script. For the past several months, Julian continued, his voice ringing with authority. Blackwood Innovations has been the victim of a cancer of greed and deception, growing in our very midst. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Marcus's. A man I trusted, a man my father trusted, has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars, deliberately weakening this company in order to sell it to our rivals. Gasps echoed through the hall. Marcus's face went pale, then flushed with rage. He started to stand up, to protest, but Julian's voice cut through him like a whip. A man who would frame an innocent woman, one of our most dedicated employees, to cover his own crimes. The stress of the confrontation, the months of grief, the sleepless nights, it all came crashing down on him at once. A sharp, crushing pain exploded in his chest, stealing his breath. His vision tunneled. He grabbed his lectern, his knuckles white, a gasp escaping his lips. Then, in front of the live cameras and the horrified audience, Julian Blackwood collapsed. The event descended into chaos. The on-site medical team, led by a renowned cardiologist, Dr. Evans, rushed the stage. Marcus looked on, a flicker of shock followed by a cold, calculating look in his eyes. This could work to his advantage. The doctors surrounded Julian. "He's in full cardiac arrest," Evans shouted. They began CPR, they administered shocks, they pushed drugs. But nothing worked. The flatline tone of the heart monitor echoed through the silent, horrified auditorium. "I'm not getting a rhythm," one medic said, sweat beading on his forehead. "Compressions aren't effective, Dr. Evans," the expert, looked defeated. "We're losing him," he said, his voice grim. "There's nothing more we can do." "I'm calling it," from the back of the room. Elena watched, her medical knowledge screaming at her. They were doing it wrong. Their hand placement for the compressions was slightly off for his body type. They weren't allowing for full chest recoil. Their defibrillation timing was off. These were small mistakes, the kind one makes under pressure without intimate, focused knowledge. Without a second thought, she moved. She ran. Security tried to stop her, but she dodged them, fueled by pure adrenaline. "Let me through," she yelled. "I can help him." She vaulted onto the stage, a whirlwind of desperate purpose. Dr. Evans looked at her with disdain. "Ma'am, this is a medical situation. Please, get back. You're losing him because your compressions are too shallow," she said, her voice clear and commanding, shocking the doctors into a moment of silence. "And you need to charge to 360 for a biphasic defibrillator on a man his size. You're underdosing the shock." Her knowledge was so specific, so confident, that they hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, she took control. She pushed a medic aside, placed her hands on Julian's chest, in the correct position, and began compressions, using her entire body weight, her rhythm perfect and powerful. "Charge to 360, she commanded. A stunned nurse complied. "Paddles." Elena grabbed them. She saw the fibrillation pattern on the monitor, the chaotic, useless quivering of the heart muscle. She knew she had one chance. "Clear," she shouted. His body arched as the electricity surged through him. The flat line returned. For a heart-stopping second, there was nothing. Then a beep, another. A slow, steady rhythm appeared on the monitor. A collective sigh of relief, of pure, unadulterated awe, swept through the room. She had done it. On live television, after 20 of the best doctors had given up, the night Maid had restarted the billionaire's heart. The aftermath of Julian's collapse and Elena's heroic intervention was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Paramedics, galvanized by her success, worked efficiently to stabilize Julian for transport. As they were about to wheel the gurney off the stage, Julian's eyes fluttered open. They found Elena's. His voice was a raw whisper, but his words were clear. "The dossier, Henderson, go." He then looked past her, his gaze falling on his stunned head of security. "Thorne," he rasped. "Don't let him leave." The order, coming from a man who had just been clinically dead, carried an almost supernatural weight. The head of security, a loyalist to the Blackwood family, nodded grimly. The spell of the moment was broken. Marcus Thorne, who had been frozen in a state of shock and calculation, realized his window of opportunity was closing. He turned to leave to salvage his plan, but found his path blocked by two formidable security guards. "Mr. Blackwood has requested you remain," the head of security said, his voice flat and final. Marcus's face contorted in a snarl. "This is ridiculous. I am the COO of this company." At that moment, Mr. Henderson, the elderly but resolute head of staff, walked calmly onto the stage, holding a thick leather-bound folder. He had been waiting in the wings, the keeper of Julian's contingency plan. He handed the dossier to the head of security. The live cameras, which had never stopped rolling, zoomed in. The whole world was watching. "This folder," the head of security announced, his voice amplified by the microphone still live on the lectern, "contains a full confession and evidence provided by Julian Blackwood's personal security consultant. It details a multi-year scheme of embezzlement, corporate sabotage, and conspiracy to commit a hostile takeover, all orchestrated by Mr. Marcus Thorne." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of bank statements from Ethelred Logistics, transcripts of incriminating phone calls, and a detailed breakdown of the money trail. The final page was a sworn affidavit from the security consultant, authenticating everything. Marcus was trapped. "These are lies. Fabrications," he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was overwhelming. But the final, most damning revelation was yet to come. The security chief turned to the last section of the dossier. "Furthermore," he said, his voice dropping to a grave tone, "we have a preliminary toxicology report, authorized by Mr. Blackwood himself several days ago. It shows trace amounts of a beta-blocker antagonist in his system, a substance known to induce cardiac stress. The substance was found to be contaminating his personal vitamin supplements, which, until last week, were sourced and provided to his office by Mr. Thorne's executive assistant. The implication was horrifying and undeniable. This wasn't just corporate espionage. It was attempted murder. Marcus had not only been trying to ruin Julian financially, he had been actively trying to kill him. The handsome, charismatic mask of Marcus Thorne finally shattered, revealing the monster beneath. The police, who had been discreetly called by Henderson the moment Julian collapsed, arrived on stage. The click of handcuffs snapping around Marcus Thorne's wrists was audible in the silent auditorium, a sound of final, irrefutable justice. As he was led away, a broken and defeated man, Elena stood quietly to the side, the world's attention finally shifting to her. She wasn't just the woman who had saved Julian Blackwood's life. She was the woman who had helped expose the villain. At the hospital, Julian was declared stable. His first act upon being able to speak was to issue a public statement from his bed. He cleared Elena's name completely, retracting her wrongful termination and exposing the frame-up. He hailed her as a hero twice over, not only for her medical intervention but for her moral courage. He announced the immediate formation of the Blackwood Cares Initiative, a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to employee welfare and advancement, and appointed Elena Ramirez as its first director, pending the completion of her nursing degree, which the company would fully fund. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been obliterated. The Invisible Woman was now one of the most celebrated figures in the city. The powerful COO was on his way to a prison cell. In the quiet of his hospital room, Julian knew that Elena had saved him in more ways than one. She hadn't just restarted his physical heart. She had resuscitated his soul. Their bond, forged in secret and tested by fire, was now unbreakable, a testament to the fact that true strength and true value are often found where we least expect them. 1 year later, the world of Blackwood Innovations was a different place. The cold, sterile corridors of the executive floor now felt warmer, more human. The transformation was a direct reflection of its leader. Julian Blackwood was no longer the ghost in the machine. The grief for his father remained, but it was no longer a hollow ache. It was a motivating force, a reminder of the legacy he now honored not just in profit margins, but in principle. He was present, engaged, and empathetic, a leader who knew the names of the cleaning staff and security guards, a man who understood that his company's greatest asset was its people. The HeartGuard device had launched successfully and was already saving thousands of lives. Its success made more poignant by the dramatic story of its creator's own survival. But the project that brought Julian the most pride was the one that bore Elena's name. The Elena Ramirez Foundation for Employee Advancement was a resounding success. It wasn't a token charity. It was a robust, well-funded engine for change within the company. It provided scholarships, housing assistance, and free medical care for all non-executive employees and their families. It was a testament to the new ethos of Blackwood Innovations, that every employee, regardless of their role, deserved dignity, respect, and the opportunity to achieve their dreams. Elena, having graduated at the top of her class with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, was the driving force behind the foundation. She had declined a corner office on the executive floor, choosing instead to base her operations in a modest but welcoming space on the ground floor, easily accessible to everyone. She was no longer a maid, but she had not forgotten where she came from. She ran the foundation with the same meticulous care, fierce intelligence, and profound empathy she had once used to polish floors and care for her mother. Her mother, thanks to the best medical care the Blackwood fortune could provide, was stable and thriving, her days filled with a peace she had not known for years. The relationship between Julian and Elena had blossomed, away from the glare of the media spotlight that had briefly consumed them. Their bond was not the stuff of tabloid fantasy, but a deep, quiet partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared experience. They had seen the worst and the best of each other and had chosen to stand together. They found their happiness not in grand romantic gestures, but in the small, meaningful moments. A late-night conversation over schematics for a new medical device, a shared smile as they reviewed scholarship applications, a walk through a city park where they could simply be Julian and Elena, not a billionaire and his heroic director. The final scene of their transformation was not set in a grand ballroom or a high-tech boardroom. It took place at a community clinic funded by their foundation, a clinic that served the city's most vulnerable residents. They stood side by side, watching as a young man, a former janitor from one of their manufacturing plants, opened an envelope. His face broke into a radiant, tearful smile. He had been accepted into medical school, the recipient of the foundation's first full-ride scholarship. In that moment, watching one life change forever, Julian finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't the number in his bank account or the height of his tower. It was this. It was the ability to create opportunity, to lift people up, to heal. He looked at Elena, her face glowing with a quiet, profound joy, and knew he was the richest man on earth. His father had left him an empire of technology, but Elena had taught him how to build an empire of hope. True value, he now knew, was not something you could own, but something you chose to see in others, and in that, he was finally truly his father's son. In the end, what drives people to greatness? Is it ambition, intellect, or wealth? The story of Julian and Elena suggests another answer. It is the courage to see the humanity in everyone, and the integrity to act on it, that holds the power to not only save a life, but to change the world.